Unleashed. I'm Arjuna, and this is the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. Today I've got Kane B on for the first time, and Purusha, who's been on before. Kane B is doing you're doing a PhD in philosophy of science. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Exeter University, and he has a YouTube channel where he does videos on all sorts of philosophical topics. Purusha's been on the channel many times before. He's doing a PhD in the problem of evil, and we'll get right into it. So, Kane and Purusha, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So we can start by Purusha giving us a laydown of an epistemology, which is an alternative to phenomenal conservatism, and what's the other one? The name slipped to my mind right now. The one pronouncing it.
Oh, Reformed Epistemology.
Reformed Epistemology, that's right. I'm going to get something in this blank space where you're talking.
Okay. So my view, I'm still developing it, but it's influenced by some strands of thought in Indian philosophy. And basically we have cognitions, and our cognitions present the world to us in a certain way. So right now I have a cognition that I'm speaking with Kane and Arjuna. And I would argue that our cognitions have a certain property, which I'll call realness, that basically serve to justify the cognition as like being true, or what philosophers would say veridical. And it's not all cognitions have realness, but most of our ones that are actually like true and correspond to reality or veridical do have this property. And it's easier to illustrate with some examples. So let's say you wake up in the morning and you go to take a shower, and every morning the shower is hot, so you come to have this expectation that when you turn on the water, it'll be hot. So you turn on the shower and it turns out to be hot. Now, it's epistemically possible that you're simply just like imagining that water to be hot because of your expectation. But I would argue that when you turn on that shower and you perceive that it's hot, you know that it's hot because that cognition has a certain amount of realness to it. And it can apply to other sensory experiences. So let's say you're like out walking and you hear like the Star-Spangled Banner playing. Like initially you might have some doubt, or you might think, is that the Star-Spangled Banner playing? You might not be sure, but as you get closer to the source of the sound, that cognition that you're hearing the Star-Spangled Banner starts to those cognitions start to get more and more realness until you reach a point where you can be like very certain that what you're hearing is the Star-Spangled Banner and not simply like imagining it to be there. So basically, when our cognitions present the world as being a certain way, and that these cognitions have a certain degree of realness, we can have like justification, or what philosophers say, prima facie justification or warrant for those cognitions being true or veridical.
Do you have any comments on that yet, Kane?
Okay. I mean, I don't really know what realness means, so I guess that would be my only comment so far.
Yeah, it's basically like a quality of our experiences, and when like our cognitions cognitions have this property, we basically sort of know our cognitions to be true. And I think it's like the examples are probably a better way of explaining it. Like when you like the shower example, for example, like when you put your hand in the shower water and you perceive that it's hot, like I said, it could be possible that you're just like imagining that water to be hot. But when you see that it's hot and you sort of have that like that sensation presented to you, then because that sensation just has a certain degree of realness, I guess like the quality that allows you to be certain that what you're perceiving is like true and not just like imaginary. Like let's say you walk like down the street and like you just see like a pig flying, like obviously like that's not something that would like happen in real life. But I would argue that like if you have like delusory experiences, like you're in the desert and you see like water, or you see like a pig flying, like those experiences don't have realness. You might imagine them to have more realness than they do have, or I don't know. There's a distinct quality to those experiences, and they don't have that property that gives us a certainty that what we're perceiving is true.
Okay, so I mean, two things. So, I mean, first of all, when so let's say I put my hand in the water and I come to believe that the water's hot. I mean, it seems to me like, and again, this is just how it seems to me. It seems to me like my belief that the water is hot isn't really based on like. So it seems like you're saying the property of realness is a property of the experience. But when I believe that the water is hot on the basis of my putting the hand in the water, I don't think that belief is based on like a property of that experience itself. So insofar as
your mic's clipping a little bit, is there a way you can turn it down?
I have no idea how to do that. So, where would I go to do this?
Yeah, I don't know what kind of mic. Oh, yeah, there'd be a setting somewhere, and if it's Windows, it'd be Device Manager, or you click down on the open sound settings on the when you.
I don't know. I literally have no idea. Okay, so like, I mean, I have a okay. Where is the microphone thing? Oh, hello. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
Can you not hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
I think I've made it better. I've turned you down inside the browser, which may have done it. So sorry.
Maybe I could just move the mic further away from my mouth.
Oh yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. So yeah. So it seems to me that when I form beliefs about what I'm perceiving, like what I'm perceiving right now, I'm not sure that I would think of that as being based on a property on some like special property of those experiences. It seems more like, well, I can remember, waking up this morning, and what I'm doing right now kind of coheres with what I remember having discussed with somebody yesterday. I was told that this would be set up, etc. So insofar as these experiences seem real, it's because of the way they seem to cohere with what I remember and with various, background opinions that I have. I mean, the other thing is that, like, I don't know, I've experienced, and I think actually, most people have, various illusory experiences or hallucinations. I used to get sleep paralysis. And one of the things that would happen when I got sleep paralysis is I would hear voices calling my name. And I honestly, like, in terms of the experience itself, I mean, although I knew it was a hallucination on the basis of various background facts, because I already knew about sleep paralysis and all of that. So I knew it was a hallucination, but there was nothing about the experience that seemed, less real. It wasn't like the actual sound of the voice had some special property that indicated that it wasn't real. So I don't know, maybe I'm just not understanding this concept correctly, but yeah, I'm not quite getting, I guess, what this is supposed to be.
Yeah, I guess like my view is that if you have a cognition with realness, it's not so much like ultimate justification, but you have some grounds for thinking that it's veridical, basically. So if there's reasons to doubt that, like it doesn't cohere with other experiences, those could like defeat that belief. But also, I think like I don't know if your view is some sort of coherentism, but it sounds like in order to know whether a belief X coheres with like beliefs Y, Z, A, we would have to have some grounds for like believing like Y, Z, or A. But if our grounds for believing in Y, Z, or A is itself like X, Z, and A, then you sort of seem to run into some circularity. So it seems like you at least need some way to verify experiences independently of other experiences in order to avoid some sort of circularity.
just to be clear, I wasn't claiming anything about like realness not providing conclusive justification. I literally just don't know what this property is supposed to be. Like that's so. You know, before we get into the question of whether it justifies any of our beliefs or anything like that, I'm just trying to like figure out, okay, what exactly is this? And when I made that point about, you know, coherence with other beliefs, that was me just saying, okay, like that's one way that I was just trying to make sense of that. So since you've just raised this objection to coherentist approaches, like I assume that's not what you have in mind. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Like maybe this is just, maybe I'm just unusual in that the structure of my experience is different in some way from other people. But I don't know. I don't know what this property of realness is. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's maybe it's similar to a seeming, but I guess it's like a seeming, like I think like when people promote like phenomenal conservatism, I think that's also one sort of issue with phenomenal conservatism, is that the notion of like a seeming is also somewhat vaguely defined. I think that maybe people consider like intuitions like a type of seeming, or maybe like perceptual beliefs. If like it seems to you that there's like a mountain in the distance, I don't know, that would be like yeah, I don't. It is a little bit vague, I guess, but maybe like when our just like experiences, they're presented to us with like a certain force, or there's just like a certain quality of them that like allows us to not doubt them so much. I think it's hard to pin down, but you sort of know it when you experience it. That's maybe one sort of way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the phantom, what was phantom wavelength? Phantom vibration. Yeah, that captures what I'm trying to get at. It's harder to, easier to make sense of it through analogies, I guess, or everyday experiences.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Oh man, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just being dumb. I don't. I, I mean, look. I have a very permissive conception of rationality. So my line on this is going to be like, yeah. I mean, that sounds fine. If people do have this property of their experiences, and then that plays some role in belief formation for them, then you know, cool. That sounds okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you had any other thoughts, Arjuna.
Not usually, no. Not my brand of anti-realism, at least. So I guess, yeah, I mean, like broadly speaking, I would consider myself a kind of empiricist, although maybe of a somewhat unusual sort. But yeah, as I see it, science is an instrument for systematizing, predicting, and controlling the observable phenomena. And I would sound pretty much.
Oh, whoops!
Yeah,
I just had my
take a
mic
sort of-
muted so people couldn't hear me. Oh well, I think you guys might have figured what it's saying, so we'll just keep it on from here on. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't take science to provide true descriptions of the world beyond the observable, or at least I am agnostic, let's say, about whether or not it succeeds in doing that. But yeah, I mean that's like there are many reasons for that, but I guess that kind of is connected, as I say, to the sort of broadly empiricist attitude that I take towards things. I don't know if you wanted me to expand on any of that, but
Yeah, so I guess what role does science serve? It's mainly what is the utility of science in your epistemology then?
systematizing, predicting, and controlling the observable phenomena.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts, Arjuna? I think you had some discussions about this, so you might have more to say on this.
Well, I interesting because usually, often when I'm dealing with skeptics or atheists, I'll make a dialectical move where I'll look to find an inconsistency in their worldview or in their epistemology alongside their worldview. But I find you interesting because you accept the consequences which are usually expose the inconsistency, which means you're consistent. So generally,
Sorry, yeah. Your microphone is like, I don't know, maybe it's it's kind of going like really quiet as you're talking. I can't. Maybe I should just change my volume. But
no, it's something at my end.
I got that too. Yeah.
So try something drastic. 1 second. Let's see if this fixes it. Is that coming through? I think I might need to.
That's good for me.
Is that better? How's that?
Well, that sounds good. Yeah.
This is really not ideal. I don't know what's going on. Where was I? Oh yeah. So usually I expose an inconsistency in the worldview that I'm. So like, for example, you can say something like, you're expecting me to prove that God exists to you on an epistemology where I can't even prove that I exist. And obviously, there's the person who you're talking to generally believes that you exist. So that's the kind of radical skepticism that I assume you don't hold. So I guess one question would be, how do you deal with solipsism?
Yeah. So I mean, I should just say, like, my own view on this. I mean, you framed it like I accept these consequences. It's not like I was, driven to this position by trying to avoid theism. I've never thought that theism was remotely plausible, even when I was a scientific realist, and that, my thoughts on that had no role whatsoever in pushing me to an anti-realist side. So I'm in this position for independent reasons. As for the point about like solipsism and just like radical skepticism in general, so my kind of line on this is, I think that we need to rethink what's really involved in holding rational beliefs. So, the kind of thing that a skeptic will say is that we can't give any justification for, whatever beliefs we happen to find ourselves with. Moreover, we can't give any justification for drawing ampliative inferences on the basis of whatever beliefs we happen to find ourselves with. So, there's no justification for making inductive inferences or anything like that. And then, of course, the skeptic will add that it is irrational to hold a belief without justification. The way that I see rationality is that rationality is more a matter of avoiding self-sabotage, let's say. So you need to have beliefs that are sort of coherent as a whole, and that that permit successful action in the world. I mean, I guess you could see this as a sort of broadly kind of pragmatist type position. For me, rationality comes down to essentially success. It's a matter of holding beliefs that allow you to, bring your experiences in line with what you want your experiences to be, allow you to, achieve your goals, etc. And in order to do that, you're going to have to stick your neck out and, hold various beliefs that could well turn out to be false. I don't think that certainty is something we can ever have any hope to acquire. So yeah, my sort of take on this is that, look, all inquiry has to start somewhere. You start with the beliefs you currently hold, and then you test them, you search for inconsistencies, always kind of relying, like, if I can take one part of my beliefs and then relying on various background beliefs, I can test them, I can ask how coherent they are, etc. I can investigate them. But any kind of inquiry is going to have to proceed on the basis of some background assumptions. So I don't really to me, the problem with sort of radical skepticism is that it's, in many ways, the kind of paradigm example of a genuinely self-sabotaging position. If I wasn't able to form any beliefs about the world, then I would be in a pretty bad position. I wouldn't be able to act at all. So yeah, I don't know. That's the answer to that. I just I guess reject the skeptic's demand for justification, and go about it in a completely different way.
Right. So how is it that you arrive at external world realism or the existence of other minds?
Well, because I already believed in an external world, and I have no good reason to doubt it. So why not? If there's somebody who, so again, just to be clear, right? I don't think there's anything irrational, right, about holding a belief without justification, right? So the fact that I can't give a justification for the external world is, in my opinion, not a problem. If there is somebody who doesn't believe in an external world, presumably, here's a sort of view that I think probably is perfectly coherent. Somebody might take the view that they're like a brain in a vat or something like that, but they'd still be believing in something beyond their senses, right? And they would still think that it operates with some degree of order that they are capable of controlling to some extent, right? Like that seems to be the sort of the kind of minimum amount that's required in order for you to get by and in order to live successfully and achieve your goals, right? So I could, I suppose, believe that this is all just a massive hallucination, but I still, as part of this hallucination, sometimes feel hungry, and I know that if I get up and go to the fridge, then I can get some food and feed myself. So, okay, somebody who has that sort of view, I think, is I wouldn't see that as being necessarily irrational. But I also don't think it's irrational to, like I say, stick your neck out and hold stronger beliefs. Since I already held various beliefs about the world, and since I've not been given any convincing reason to abandon them, I just proceed with them. And I think that this is probably the only option any of us have. So, yeah.
So it's quite similar to Graham Oppy's view that there's many rational worldviews, and depending on what assumptions you make, you're rational and holding various worldviews, which is quite different from the hardline atheist or hardline theist that only people who agree with me are rational and everyone else is irrational. But with what you just described, I think there is a bit of epistemology in there, and it sounds like a kind of phenomenal conservatism. Do you want to comment on that, Adipurusha?
Well, I was gonna first. Do you take theists to be rational if, or I guess, like, let's say someone finds himself believing in God, and that leads them to like, you know, it doesn't like cause them to harm other people. They lead like a functional, normal life. They find like fulfillment in that. It doesn't sound like you would see that as so irrational then.
No, it isn't. I don't think
Okay.
that is irrational.
Okay.
I mean, obviously there can be irrational theists, but I mean, there's nothing. Well, I mean, in general, actually, there isn't going to be anything irrational about any specific belief. I mean, it depends on the other beliefs a person has, and you know, how it affects their life and so on. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything necessarily irrational about theism.
Oh, that's interesting. So your view doesn't sound all that skeptical, actually. I somehow
I don't think it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it does sound similar to phenomenal conservatism, like in the absence of like reasons to think otherwise, like how we perceive the world, what we believe is probably true, unless there's like other considerations. I don't know if you've sort of you hold to phenomenal conservatism or looked into it, or.
I mean, I don't think so, because I think that phenomenal conservatism, I mean, maybe there are some similarities, but it feels like what the phenomenal conservative is trying to do is sort of trying to give a, let's say, a kind of response to the skeptic on the skeptic's own terms, right? Like the skeptic has challenged our justification, and then the phenomenal conservative will say, well, you know, here's how you have, here's the justification for believing in an external world. But I don't know. I might be wrong about that. It's not something I've looked into that much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they would. They justify it. They do use this notion of seemings, and I think it's a little vague, but like intuitions, I guess, like would be a type of seeming on that view. But yeah, that's. I'm just curious. So, what motivated you to go from like scientific realism to scientific anti-realism?
I just the overwhelming weight of the arguments. I happen to be doing realism, anti-realism for my undergraduate dissertation, and I started out as a scientific realist, and then I just shifted to anti-realism. So I should say that, you know, what I've just outlined here is like my general epistemological views. When it comes to the scientific realism debate specifically, the main thing for me was what you find in almost all forms of realism is an attempt to infer from the success of a theory to its truth, right? So different realists will focus on different kinds of success, but you know, stuff like successful novel predictions, for instance, you know, general relativity, for example, had the, you know, remarkable and unexpected prediction of, you know, the value for light bending around the sun, or gravitational redshift of light or whatever. Okay, you confirm these surprising novel predictions. That provides strong support for the view that the theory is true. So that's a kind of success. Other realists will emphasize things like technological success, the way that we can use our theories to, you know, build instruments or to, you know, engage in engineering projects or whatever. But, you know, for almost all realists, there's this attempt to draw a connection between success and truth, where success is supposed to be indicative of the general truth of our theories. And I just came to the view that doesn't work. So, yeah, that's basically the reason why.
Oh, okay. Are there any like sort of like main arguments, or like a series of arguments, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I guess I mean, I don't actually think this is a particularly good argument, but it's kind of very useful for illustrative purposes to sort of, I mean, it's maybe useful to sort of make anti-realism plausible to people. It's just to look at the history of science, where you can find you know, it is littered with theories which were very successful, but which turned out to be false, at least in terms of their description of the like underlying structure and nature of reality. So a good example is Newtonian mechanics. Go back to the 1800s, Newtonian mechanics was the most powerful empirical theory that anybody had. and it turned out to be wrong, and not like a little bit wrong. I mean, it's radically false, again, in its description of the underlying structure and nature of the world. Now, in its description of the observable phenomena, or at least the observable phenomena within a particular range of masses and velocities, it's remarkably accurate. It's remarkably powerful, like to the point that we still use it to this day. But it achieves that power through through a description of reality that does contain significant falsehood. Moreover, you can just look at like contemporary science, and scientists will constantly appeal to idealizations. So, if I'm modeling a star, for example, then I might, for the purposes of simplifying the equations, assume that the star is composed of an ideal gas, even though we know that there are no ideal gases. So, yeah, I mean, I guess one sort of point that maybe makes anti-realism a little bit more intuitive is just to say, well, actually just look at science, right? And in science, you find falsehood that constantly produces empirical success. So that should perhaps lead you to doubt whether theories that we don't yet know are false are actually true. I think that's probably the main sort of thing that at least makes people tempted towards anti-realism.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I don't know if you had any thoughts, Arjuna. I mean, that actually sounds quite reasonable. So I take it you're probably against like scientism, like, or at least like have some like epistemic humility about the scope of science, and like you're realistic that like science is a tool, but like the theories we draw are not like set in stone, and like obviously.
Yeah, I guess so. I suppose it depends on how you're using the term scientism, because I mean, I happen to think that science is an extraordinarily powerful tool. And I mean, certainly I don't see scientific anti-realism as involving, like, I mean, this is in a sense like a purely philosophical position, right? I mean, I'm not doubting the specific, like, I'm not saying, well, general relativity is false, and here's something better. I'm not like proposing alternative empirical theories or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know. I also, like I mentioned that I tended to be an empiricist. Like, I think, and I mean, science doesn't get at the truth, but nothing else does either. So, science is pretty much the best we've got when it comes to understanding how the world works. And given the fact that science isn't successful at, producing true descriptions of reality, I'm going to say that obviously endeavors like metaphysics are completely misguided. But not necessarily irrational, because, as I said, I have a very permissive conception of rationality.
Yeah, I guess I could have also distinguished between different types of scientism, but seems like you hold to like a weak scientism. Like, nothing has the answers, but science is like the best sort of methodology we have.
I guess that probably captures my position. Yeah, I mean, certainly when it comes to learning about what the world is like.
With Newtonian physics, couldn't we just say that it hasn't necessarily been shown to be wrong? It's been shown to be true in a limited domain, and that if we extrapolate its truth beyond that domain, we're mistaken.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. And so, the domain in which we can show it to be true is the domain of the observable phenomena. And that's exactly the domain in which we can show any other scientific theory to be true. That's the domain in which I think we can show general relativity is true. General relativity does a better job than Newtonian mechanics does in that domain. Of course, Newtonian mechanics has a more limited domain, further, because actually it doesn't capture all of the observable phenomena. I mean, that's exactly why it was displaced. But when you look at what the theory tells you about like the underlying structure of, space and time, mass, gravity, light, right? I mean, it's just completely false. It's not even like approximately true. It just gets it wrong. That's the kind of view that I would take to just all scientific theories, or at least I'm going to just be agnostic, right? Like, I don't necessarily want to say that our present theories are false. I'm just agnostic about whether they correctly describe the reality behind the phenomena.
I'm inclined to ask this, the solipsism question again. So the existence of other minds. So it's the fact that other people can experience pain and joy and aren't philosophical zombies. It's not observable. It's an assumption, or it's an intuition. But of course, you've already mentioned you think it's reasonable, and you kind of gave a phenomenal conservative answer. I have this belief, and I have no reason to doubt it. So if that epistemology works for the existence of other minds, would it not work for other things?
So just to be clear, like, I also don't think there's anything irrational about being a scientific realist. So this is, a debate on which I think both sides can be, perfectly rational. With other minds, I mean, I have no idea what other people's experiences are like, and I also don't really care. Like, it doesn't make any difference to my behavior, what's going on inside other people's heads. So when I attribute, like if I say, for instance, that you are looking at a computer screen, I don't know, I don't really see that as being a claim about like the, I guess, phenomenal qualities of your experience or anything like that. I mean, yeah, so I think you could probably just consider me to be an agnostic on the question of people's other minds. It's like, I don't know, maybe I don't have strong beliefs about that. I'm not sure I really have any beliefs about it. For all I know, you could be a couple of philosophical zombies, and it wouldn't make any difference to me. I'm not joking, right? Like, I genuinely.
We should probably define philosophical zombies for the viewers. So, for anyone who doesn't know, a philosophical zombie is not anything like the movies. It's a thought experiment idea that somebody has all the trappings of being a real conscious person, except they're a meat robot. There's nobody home, no consciousness, nothing that it's like to be that person. So, you could also call them a philosophical meat robot, perhaps. I forgot what I was going to say back. Did you have any comments, Adi?
Yeah, I guess, like, it does sound very similar to phenomenal conservatism, which I'm sympathetic to. It sounds like basically like appearances are like rational to believe in unless there's reason to think otherwise. And aside from that, like, the best way to acquire knowledge of like the empirical world is basically like science. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the like, sort of appearances are probably what they are unless there's a reason to think otherwise. But I guess I'd be curious to hear more your thoughts on metaphysics and why you think science is superior, or you seem to have like I don't quite know your views on like philosophy or metaphysics. It seems like you think science is better, but I don't see you're not like outright dismissive of metaphysics from what it sounds like either.
I think one thing that might be worth clearing up is you keep saying you find these other views, you consider them rational. So I guess there's this distinction to be made whether you think they're true or whether you think they're rational. Would that be the way to distinguish the two?
Yeah, I think you can rationally hold false beliefs, but I don't know if that's necessarily an unusual position. I think it would be, I think, pretty implausible to suppose that rationality, like, in order to be rational, you at least have to be. Because, yeah, I mean, people can rationally make mistakes, right? But no. So, I mean, I guess the way to put it is that like I said, right? So my take on rationality, right, is that it's just a matter of holding beliefs and coming to form beliefs, right, in such a way that you achieve success in your goals, right? I mean, and maybe that's putting it a bit too simply, but that is basically what it amounts to for me. Which means there's going to be just a whole load of different, like, sets of beliefs that count as rational, even if they're completely different to mine. And metaphysics is a good example of that, right? Like, my own position is of a really hardcore empiricist. So I basically just do reject metaphysics. I think the whole program is fundamentally misguided, but I can't see any good way of claiming that that somebody is irrational for engaging in that inquiry. In fact, it's probably good that people do that. I certainly enjoy reading metaphysics, so I get something out of it, and I think that there is a utility, at least in philosophy, of letting 1,000 flowers bloom and promoting lots of different ways of thinking about things and lots of different ways of approaching philosophical questions. So for many reasons, I guess I don't see anything necessarily irrational in these other views.
That might be an unusual definition of rationality. For example, that view would seem to permit as rational a person who was told, if you take this pill, you'll believe false beliefs. You'll believe, in a sky daddy who'll make you happy. You'll go to church and you'll believe the whole thing's true. But as a result of these beliefs, you'll be happy and peaceful and live a long, prosperous, happy life. And then you'll die and none of it will have been true. So it seems to me that your view would consider a person who takes that pill consciously chooses to live a deluded life because it will make them happy. Such a person would be rational.
Yeah, probably. That doesn't strike me as a counterintuitive consequence.
Well, many people on the non-theist or atheist side of the debate will tend to think that rationality means believing the truth at any cost.
Okay, I mean,
I'm just pointing out
that's not my position.
I'm just pointing out that it's not a standard view. It's a kind of unorthodox.
Oh no. I mean, so yeah, I mean, my view here is definitely. I'm aware it's not a standard view, but I don't know. I'm okay with that. So.
I got worried my toddler had broken this mic because he was sitting in here playing with things, so I took it apart, but it looks fine. I think it got switched to Omni mode. It's got a little switch there. It was in Omni mode, so maybe that's what it was. Slight digression.
Yeah, I guess philosophers, they generally, they're concerned with knowledge as justified true belief. So the quest for justification is usually tied closely to truth. But you're basically just okay with the consequences of your epistemology, and accepting that taking that pill would be rational, even if it leads to falsehoods.
Yeah. I mean, I should say that when I talk about rationality in this context, I usually am thinking of rationality of belief rather than rationality of action. Although, of course, belief and action are connected. I haven't really thought about the topic of rational action quite so much. So I don't know. Maybe if I did, I might have a different view on this sort of situation. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it's kind of hard to imagine these examples because obviously we're not really you don't sort of face these situations where you're offered a pill that's going to produce what are false beliefs. But I mean, for example, right, the experience machine, right? Nozick's experience. If somebody offered the experience machine, I would definitely get in it. So it seems like the pill is just a sort of less impressive version of that, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a quite similar question. So I had a discussion on my channel a while back with Matt Dillahunty and Dr. Howard Resnick on epistemology, and Dr. Howard Resnick was arguing for a kind of intuition-based epistemology where you expand your consciousness. There's a kind of virtue epistemology element to it. So by elevating your consciousness, your ability to perceive reality accurately increases. And an everyday example that all of us accept is if there's sort of low lifes, engaged in drugs, and these people believe that it's okay to, rape and steal and also, steal from their parents to fuel their drug habit. If they believe that's okay, the rest of us are just going to be like, they're wrong. And it's not that we can offer a rational argument for it that doesn't rely on assumptions that the people who disagree with us just don't accept. There's not like there'll be a premise in our argument that they reject. So there's nothing we can offer to that person who disagrees with us. It's an axiomatic disagreement. But we'll just say those people are in a lower state of consciousness and they're just not seeing reality accurately. People who are more cultured, they know that these things are wrong. And similarly, if you elevate your consciousness further, you might see that God exists. And if we find people who are somehow, we could perhaps measure they're in an elevated state of consciousness and they're all seeing similar things. So like William James and other people have written about religious experience, and they've done it in a sort of non-sectarian way where they remove whatever interpretations based on the religion from it. So, often people have a religious experience and they'll say, this is unique proof for my religion in exclusion to all other religions, but that's an interpretation. The contradiction's not necessarily there. So you need a kind of universalism for this epistemology to work. So that was just a bit of background. The point I wanted to make based on this was Matt Dillahunty replied saying, well, this whole sort of elevating the consciousness business, that's priming the pump. So priming the pump means you get people to expect to see something, and then voila, they see it. You convince people they're going to see something, and later on they'll see it. But it could be that the point I wanted to make is Matt Dillahunty's worldview is in a sense doing the same thing, because you go to university for years and years and years and study science, and that's also priming the pump. So the fact that most scientists believe in this materialistic worldview could just be explained by the same priming the pump argument. So there's an inconsistency there in the epistemology Matt Dillahunty, or the arguments he was forwarding, because he also believes in this materialistic worldview. But that same inconsistency is not present in your worldview, Kane, because you would probably accept, there is some priming the pump going on both sides, and I think both of them are going beyond the evidence. Would that be an accurate description of your view?
I mean, so I think pretty much any belief that we form, we have to stick our necks out and, go beyond what, so I don't think that, on the basis of any set of evidence, that there are like principles of rationality that can tell you, right, what you ought to believe on the basis of that evidence. I mean, you mentioned William James. Well, he has this nice example of like how, not example, but he just makes this nice point that there are at least two goals that you're going to have in inquiry. One is forming true beliefs. The other is avoiding false beliefs. And those two things, those two goals, are usually going to pull you in different directions, because whatever methods you apply to, form true beliefs, it's likely that those, on the basis of those same methods, you're going to form some false beliefs as well. Of course, you could go all the way, the whole way to skepticism and just avoid letting in any false beliefs at all. But you're just not going to be able to hold any beliefs if you do that. So, we sort of have these two goals and they pull us in different directions. And rationality can't tell you, how to weigh up which of those is most important. There's no rule for weighing up which is most important. And I mean, there are going to be other goals that you have in inquiry as well. But I think that with any belief we form, we have to be we're going to be taking risks. And it's sort of up to the individual to, decide what sort of risks they want to take. On the other hand, I'm not sure that I agree that there's really an inconsistency in like a materialist worldview. I suppose it depends on what exactly that means. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself a materialist or physicalist or anything, but that's partly because I'm not sure that I understand what those terms, like I say, I think there are some difficulties making them coherent when you look at like the broad tradition of materialism and physicalism. But obviously, specific individuals might have worldviews that are perfectly coherent. So, yeah.
Oh, I think you're muted, Arjuna. We can't hear you.
I was just having another go to see if my mic was working, but no, there seems to be something wrong with it.
Okay.
The inconsistency in the materialist worldview that I was talking about is in a dialectical context where they're offering arguments against an opposing worldview, which pose an equal problem for their worldview. So like the priming the pump thing. So if you say, oh, the theists are just, priming the pump, and that's why, this whole argument that you go through a process of elevating your consciousness and then you can see the truth of theism, that's just priming the pump, and it's not actually an elevation of consciousness to see something. You could make that same argument against a scientific worldview based on materialism that, oh, that whole getting a scientific education, that's just priming the pump. And of course you're going to see things that way after you've been, trained to think in that fashion. So that's just what I meant by the contradiction. So I have a lot of respect for the consistency I see in your worldview, Kane, as opposed to what you see so often in internet atheism. Of course, I was talking in a dialectical context about your worldview and how it compares to other worldviews and theism. And you said, well, I'm not motivated by avoiding theism. So it's worth commenting that you're not one of these people that has created their worldview around being an atheist or something. You just have a worldview and you don't really think too much about religion. This channel is largely philosophy of religion, so a lot of people I get on are focused on philosophy of religion. So I'm just absorbed in that kind of dialectical context. That's all.
What was the? I don't know if you wanted to go into this, but I'm just a bit curious. What was the priming the pump? Because in the case of the materialist, right? What exactly is the priming the pump there? Like, is the idea that doing science primes the pump for a materialist worldview? Is that the point?
I would say it would be all of the philosophy you get when you do a science degree, or when you get, like one thing why philosophy is not so popular these days is because people get a kind of hollow form of philosophy from science. So, traditionally science wasn't such a big deal, but philosophy was a big deal. But these days, science is a big deal. And when people get a scientific education, there's a lot of philosophy in there, but it's not subjected to the same rigor as if you actually did it through philosophers, because scientists aren't trained in philosophy. So you do get a lot of philosophy when you get a scientific education. And so the science itself, I wouldn't call that priming the pump. If you're just doing science and figuring out how to build bridges or build jet engines or whatever it might be, then that's not priming the pump. But when you're told, oh, and this shows God doesn't exist, or this, we understand all the stuff about what causes the weather, therefore we know there's not a person behind it. Well, that's philosophy, not science. You don't know. You've come up with a mechanism, but you don't know that there's not a person behind that mechanism. That hasn't not been shown by the science. That's just a bad philosophical argument which is made.
I also thought that the priming the pump was specifically in reference to religious experience. Dillahunty's view is when you have a spiritual experience and you elevate your consciousness, or you have certain there's certain spiritual feel to that experience that you can reduce that to just your expectations about that practice that led to those experiences. And I don't know, when the theist experiences something supernatural, Dillahunty would just say that's you've just trained yourself to see material or physical phenomenon as having some supernatural property. But I guess maybe a interesting question would be let's say there's a spiritual practitioner.
Oh, I think this is fixed now. Is it? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's better.
Oh, okay, it was just I forgot to turn phantom power back on again, so I think my mic's fine. It was just in omni mode.
Okay. Yeah, let's say there's a spiritual practitioner and he's doing certain mystical practice, and then he perceives he's experiencing a certain spiritual feel to that experience that's different than anything material. He's experiencing his consciousness being elevated. He's developing certain qualities. I think like an interesting question would be like, how do we know that what he's experiencing is like actually grounded in like a supernatural being, or how would we? I mean, the naturalist would say that like he's priming the pump, but the supernaturalist would say that he's experiencing something divine. And I think it'd be interesting to. I mean, that's one of the difficult questions for religious experience. But like, how could we know which interpretation is correct? But I think Arjuna was probably trying to say that like when someone has this experience and they attribute like they try to reduce it to the material, that's also like a sort of priming the pump, or from what I understood.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I think I'm totally cool with the idea that both, whatever interpretation somebody wants to make of the data they have, we each have to just make the best conclusion we can based on what we have. We can't just say, only the interpretation I have is rational. I think that's a bit presumptuous. But I think this idea of ascending levels of realization needs to be discussed because, you could think your phone's ringing when it's not, and then a second later it could actually ring. And the moment it starts actually ringing, you're like, oh no, it wasn't ringing before. I was imagining it. Now it's actually ringing. Or a classic example that's given is green mangoes. So you could eat green mangoes your entire life and think that you're eating ripe mangoes. But the moment you have a ripe mango, you'll know the difference and you'll understand that this is a ripe mango. It's much sweeter. It's much tastier. Of course, somebody might say they like green mangoes, and that would be a different thing. But it's an analogy. It's not going to be a perfect example of the principle being established. So, like with Newtonian physics, we discovered it and it was great. But now we have a deeper understanding. It's not that we disproved Newtonian physics; it's that we've ascended to a higher level of understanding the nature of the physical universe. And the one quality of the ascending levels of realization, one way you can prove that something is actually an elevated understanding, is that it's not possible to go backwards. Like you could think your phone's ringing when it's not, but once it actually rings, it's not possible to think that's the other way around, that now that it's actually ringing and think, oh, now this is me imagining it, but a moment ago it was ringing. That it's not possible to go that way. It only moves in one direction. Any comments?
Yeah, I think I like the ascending levels of realization, sort of you looking at things. But I think I was having, this is sort of one point of contention that comes up. Like when a theist has a religious experience, there's like two competing interpretations. Like one is that, okay, you're experiencing God. The other one is, okay, like there's some physical processes like hyperactive agent detection devices and all these sorts of things. And there's like a crucial question, like how do you know which interpretation is like more likely to be true or correct, like the supernatural one or the natural one? And I don't know if anyone's given like a really compelling response, but I mean, I like the ascending levels of realization. I don't know if this is something that science can even ascertain. Like I think maybe you have to like employ philosophy, or maybe there's just like a quality of the experience that makes it evident that it's the supernatural one.
I mean, I think it comes down to the individual. Like there's a limited domain of things which can be proven at the public level. So often when you're having these debates, the skeptic or the atheist will say something like, if it was true, then why can't it be proven? And what they mean by that is in a public way, like, when the general theory of relativity was proven. It's proven in a public way. Like anyone can go and see the proof. Anyone can look into the arguments. Of course, if you want to look at the math, it might take years and years and years of study. But, the basic idea, people have figured out how to explain it to a layperson. But God's existence isn't a thing which is going to be proven in a public way like that. It's proven in a private way to individuals, which makes it quite different from a lot of so often a skeptic will ask for proof, and they'll ask for proof in a way not applicable because of the nature of God compared to the nature of the general theory of relativity, for example. So what that means is it's really an individual journey. So there could be two different interpretations, and it's not like you can prove one of them's better, but an individual is well, I guess we're coming back to the rationality thing, that a person's rational and coming to a conclusion. And then, of course, I was having this discussion with Nathan of Digital Gnosis about a week ago, and one point that's made is, because it's about divine hiddenness, right? Like, if God exists, why isn't it obvious to everyone, and so on. And well, I brought up a quote that I got from Seth. You might know the quote that like a little bit of science makes you an atheist, but a lot makes you a theist, or something about quantum physics, that it's like, the scientists got like to the last peak, and then they got to plateau, and there was a collection of sages that have been waiting there all along. Because, basically science gets to the quantum level, and it seems like a lot of stuff that sages and whatnot have been talking about for eons.
Actually, that's like an interesting distinction. There's certain things that we can only prove at a private level versus at a public level, and I guess like the mystical experience would be one of those things that you can't prove at the public level, because at the end of the day, it's someone's subjective personal experience. But I wonder if you could prove it at a private level. Maybe that's where the contention is.
I mean, it happens all the time in NDEs that people are like full-on skeptics, atheists, all that sort of stuff, and then like next thing they wake up and they're watching their body on the operating table, and they travel around town. And one example, the guy saw a 25-cent coin on top of an air conditioner. He came back and he said to the doctor, "I had this experience. People explained things to me. I need to know that this was true. Can you go and look on top of the air conditioning unit? Maybe it's a TV, and check if there's a quarter there." And he looked, and there was a quarter there. So these things happen. And when people have these experiences, they see colors that they don't see in their ordinary experience. There's more colors there. They think more clearly. So there's this the word realness. I'd say they'd feel that. So that would be an example of a private thing. And then often the doctors that see this experience, they have their worldview turned around.
Wouldn't that be? Wait a minute. I mean, if that's true, which I'm deeply skeptical of these accounts of NDEs, but I mean, let's just assume that that's true. I mean, that would be a public confirmation, at least of the non-physicality of the mind, or something like that. Maybe not of God, but I mean, if it really is the case that people who are dead are able to see things that they wouldn't be able to see even if they were alive, and then report on it later, that looks like we'd have pretty strong public evidence that this. So I don't know, it seems like that's
so I would agree that would count as public evidence. Of course, we could discuss whether the evidence is actually there. That would be another discussion. So hypothetically, on the assumption that it's true, I would call that public evidence. Why people don't accept it is another thing. That could be discussed based on the strength of the evidence, or based on people's psychological motivations to not accept it, which would be two separate discussions, of course, starting with the strength of the evidence. But that doesn't prove much. It only proves that physicalism is wrong, and that there's something beyond the physical. But
actually, I don't think it even. I'm not sure it even proves that physicalism is wrong. Physicalism has been remarkably effective at transforming itself to whatever the current evidence suggests. But I mean, okay, it would show, I suppose, that there's more to the mind than the brain, or something like that. Yeah.
Well, if you want to call a mind existing separate from the body and the senses of the body physical, fine, but then I think the word physical has lost all its meaning at that point.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what would happen if this evidence were to come through in that way is that physicalists would just essentially redefine physicalism. I think this has already happened many, many times throughout the history of science.
There's a physical soul.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, I mean, we say that like a physical soul in a jokey way, but I mean, like Thomas Hobbes was a hardcore materialist, and he believed in souls and God. He just thought they were material things. But I think that what the sort of materialist or physicalist worldview counts as being material or physical has just changed with changing science, right? I mean, today we accept all sorts of things that would have been utterly bizarre and occult to materialists in the 1700s.
Yeah, I mean, I use the word physicalism because I think, naturalism is the word that's generally used that can mean basically whatever you want it to mean. I've had an atheist tell me that if God existed, God would be natural, and it's like, well, depending how you want to define the word natural, but sure, like the word naturalism is only about 500 years old, so if you ask people 1,000 years ago if God's natural, they'd say sure, but that's a different sense of the word natural. But then when the atheists or non-theists want to use the word naturalism to mean, Graham Oppy defines it as the idea that no gods or anything like them exists. I think that's kind of a fair definition, but when naturalism keeps stretching itself to include all this parapsychology stuff, then you have to wonder how well it's keeping its distance from theism.
Well, I mean, like I said, Thomas Hobbes, materialist and a theist. So I'm pretty sure that contemporary physicalists could figure out a way of making it work.
Yeah, Joe Schmidt was telling me I should have a Christian physicalist on. He thinks that would be interesting, having two theists who have completely different metaphysical or ontological views on would be interesting. So I might look into that. The point I was coming to when I brought up all this epistemology stuff with this discussion I had with Nathan was, I was making this point. I made brought up the quote that, a little bit of science makes you an atheist, but a lot brings you to theism. So, of course, that's debatable. But he was making this point that, then you get James Fodor, who's studied science really deeply, and he's like a committed atheist. So that would... He was saying that's evidence against that hypothesis, and then you have to bring in virtual epistemology, where it's like, I don't know if this quote's from Augustine or something, that there's enough light in the world for those who want to seek it, and enough darkness in the world for those who want to seek it. The problem with that kind of argument is then at that point you're talking about psychological motivations or sincerity or people's dispositions or their personal journey, instead of actually talking about the evidence and the strength of it and the reasoning and so on. So Nathan was making this argument that kind of disproves your epistemology, because we have somebody, he gave the example of James Fodor, who he takes to be sincere and intelligent. I would not question that. And he's come to a different conclusion, and he gave that as evidence against the kind of epistemology I was offering. But you could perhaps, I don't think this can be avoided, because you also get theists who look really deeply at the scientific evidence, and they don't come to an atheistic conclusion. So how do you distinguish between the two, if not that God has, why is it not valid to say God has set things up that if people want to not find God, they won't find him. If people want to find him, they will. Is there not a similar thing being done by the atheist where they say attribute psychological motivations to the theist who studies science but doesn't come to the same conclusion as the atheist?
Yeah, what you said did sort of spark some things to mind. Like, I think for like this, the way this world is, even within science, you could say, like, given a body of evidence, like, I think there's like the term underdetermination of theory by data, like given a body of data or evidence, like there's any number of ways you can interpret that. But maybe like materialist way or physicalist way or whatever is like you probably use abductive reasoning. So like either one, you acknowledge that it's just like ambiguous and it's not really in favor of theism or naturalism, or you like employ some sort of like abductive reasoning process to argue that like naturalism is like the better, it's like an inference, the best explanation that favors naturalism. I think like if a materialist or physicalist wants to look at the data and say that it leads to like atheism, then I think that's when you have to bring in like a little bit of philosophy to argue like what makes for a better worldview, like what are the features of a worldview that make it like a better explanation than competing worldviews. I mean, I think that's, I don't know. I mean, Graham Oppy has tried this with like naturalism and theism. Like he's looked at naturalism, he's looked at theism, and he argues that like naturalism does just as well as like theism in terms of like explanatory scope and predictive fruitfulness and all these things. But like naturalism is like more simple, so we should prefer that. But some people disagree. They say that like theism is actually more simple. I would probably disagree that like simplicity is even like a virtue in like metaphysical theses, although it tends to be good in the sciences. I don't know. I think we need some system of like comparing worldviews at that point.
Yeah, that's definitely worth getting into. That's something which would take a bit of rigor.
Yeah, like it seems to be where like philosophy of religion is heading, at least. Like, okay, we have this body of evidence. Like we have like, like theists would say, like we have fine-tuning arguments. We have like all these sorts of arguments, cosmological arguments. Like atheists would say we have the problem of evil, and like probably the problem with philosophy of religion is that like, there's all these arguments for each position, and there's like all these considerations. But like, how do you like choose the best worldview? You need some like way of like worldview selection, and like criteria by which you choose one worldview is like a better explanation than another. And I think there's some attempts being made to do that, but I think it's an area where there could be like further development still.
I think we're veering too much outside of Kane's main focus, which is philosophy of science. I don't have much to comment.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I can talk about this topic. Yeah, I mean, like as I mentioned, I'm an empiricist. I don't take inference to the best explanation to be truth tracking in general. So, my line on this comparison of worldviews is, knock yourself out, but no thanks. I won't be taking part. I'm completely agnostic on those sorts of metaphysical questions.
Oh, right. That's the other thing I wanted to discuss, because I commented on Facebook to you that if we throw out inference to the best hypothesis, then we can't have criminal prosecution, because inference to the best explanation is basically the only tool you've got for historical sciences, which is like archaeology, evolution, and if we're talking about theism, in many ways, you're talking about historical science, like creation events, intelligent design, fine tuning. You're looking back to the past in many ways. So it's also inference to the best hypothesis is the only tool. And similarly for criminal prosecution, it's all you've got. And events happened. There's bullet wounds. There's trajectories. There's guns. There's fingerprints. There's blood and all sorts of things. Broken glass, and that all gets presented in court. And that whatever the best explanation is argued for, and the jury makes a decision whether they think it as a good explanation for the evidence or not. And so on Facebook, you replied saying, well, if that's a problem for criminal prosecution, then it's a problem for criminal prosecution. So you stand by that?
Yeah. I don't really care that much about criminal prosecution. So I would say though that my objection to inference to the best explanation is, so specifically, I don't think that this is a general rule, right? And I don't think there are any general rules for belief formation. What's usually going on when people appeal to inference to the best explanation, I think, is a sort of disguised appeal to other types of facts that license the inference. I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of cases where criminal prosecutions are going to turn out to be acceptable. But the problem is when we sort of model that in terms of a general rule that we then think can just be applied like universally, no matter what the context, no matter what the background facts are. Here's just one simple, example, right? So one of the things that needs to be the case for an inference to the best explanation to work is that we need to have background facts which license the assumption that the inference is not going to be the best of a bad lot, right? So, if you form a bunch of potential explanations, right, and then you evaluate them in accordance with, whatever your explanatory criteria are, and then you choose one. Even if you assume that your criteria are truth tracking, you're only going to get the true explanation if you have good reason to assume that you have, in fact, generated all of the plausible explanations. Because if you haven't done that, if you don't have that assumption in place, then it doesn't matter if you pick the best one. The best one might be the best of a bad lot. In the case of criminal prosecution, perhaps it is the case that there are background facts which license the assumption that indeed the explanation we've got is going to be that we do in fact have the true explanation among the available explanations. More generally, though, it's like, so I think that a really big problem with inference to the best explanation is that there's like, okay, it's what exactly is an explanation, right? What are the standards by which one explanation is supposed to be better than another? When you start to fill all of this in, what you will find, I think, is that there isn't like a general rule of inference here. So the only reason why it seems like we have a general rule of inference that we're applying in all of these different contexts, that, so we might say, well, inference the best explanation, we're applying that in the courtroom, and we're applying that in, science when we come to the conclusion that the universe arose in a big bang, and we're applying that as theists when we come to the conclusion that, the best explanation for the universe is God or whatever, right? This idea that there is a general rule of inference, I think, just rests on the fact that inference, the best explanation, is so vague, and that when we really fill out what we mean by an explanation, what our standards are, what are the background facts that are licensing the assumption that we have the true explanation in the available explanations, fill all of that in, I think there's very different kinds of inferences occurring in each case. I mean, it's kind of like saying, like, well, you should like infer to the best supported belief or something like that. I mean, well, yeah, okay, that's incredibly vague, and certainly not very helpful. So I don't know. Does that maybe explain a little bit more about?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One
stance
is ascending levels of realization. So you may have the best of a bad lot, but then if a better one comes along, you can know, well, this one's better. I can't remember what the other thing was. The other thing was sometimes you could have an explanation which is as like so many different data points. So, one crime might be, the person may be guilty, but the evidence is just so weak that it's not really sound to prosecute the person, and they may get off. But it could be, then there can be other cases where there's just so many different lines of evidence that all converge. The likelihood that all of them converged all with the same conclusion in a coherent fashion without it being true would be beyond reasonable doubt, which I guess that's the standard they come up with in court. So that's how they define it, beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So are you against inference to the best explanation, like in principle, or are you opposed to it in practice because the way it's currently being done is just very vague and doesn't really do a good job of like fleshing out why this explanation is the best?
Well, it's not even that I'm against it. It's that I don't believe that we actually I don't think there is actually a sort of definable rule that people are actually applying just in general. So it's not so much about being like against the rule. It's that I don't think that this really accurately captures what's actually going on when we reason. So, okay, here's a specific example of this, right? So you mentioned simplicity as something that's often applied as an explanatory criterion. Yeah. So in the case of simplicity, right, let's say this example comes from John Norton, right? Let's say that you see a sort of tracks on the beach, right, which look like birds' feet going across the beach. And there's like one line of tracks, okay? So in this case, you'd probably say, well, that was produced by one bird. And you might say that the reason why we infer that it's produced by one bird is because that's the simpler hypothesis. Okay, but now imagine that you have like a load of tracks on the beach, all like overlapping. Are we going to infer that that was produced by one bird? Well, no. I think that what's going on here is that when we say that the one bird hypothesis is the simpler hypothesis, really that's just a disguised appeal to the background fact that is supported by overwhelming empirical observation, which is that when you have, one line of tracks, that tends to be produced by, like, we just know from observing birds that you don't tend to get birds acting in such a way that more than one of them will produce one single straight line. Whereas, of course, that does happen plenty of times if you see tracks like that, right? Birds do tend to act in such a way as to do that. And that's just based on straightforward empirical observation. So it's not really that there's, like simplicity considerations here. It's not like one hypothesis is simpler than another. It's just one is, better supported by the empirical evidence, or at least one is better in line with our background knowledge, which is based on the empirical evidence. So I think that we can very often eliminate these appeals to explanatory criteria. So yeah, I just think that it's not really very useful as a description of what our actual patterns of reasoning are. And it becomes very problematic when people then assume that we do in fact reason in accordance with these criteria, and then they apply those criteria in completely different contexts to come to completely different conclusions. Such as when people start saying that, oh, well, such and such hypothesis is, a simpler explanation for the existence of the universe. And so that's the hypothesis that we are, rationally compelled to adopt. That's what I would have a problem with that kind of thing.
I see. Yeah, I like the idea of abductive reasoning in general, but I think when you do it, you have to outline different theoretical virtues, and you have to explain why they're truth conducive. But I think there's some I'm developing this also, but when comparing metaphysical worldviews, I would say likeliness is a theoretical virtue. So if worldview A makes or if there's some data set of data, and that's more likely to occur on worldview A over worldview B, that's worldview A has more likeliness, and that's not a definitive factor, but I think that's you can reasonably say that that's a theoretical virtue that worldview A has over worldview B. Similar things like causal adequacy. So if there's some phenomenon and you have an available explanation for how that could have been caused in worldview A, and you don't have an explanation of how that could have been caused in worldview B, then worldview A would do better in terms of causal adequacy. So I'm a little bit more optimistic in principle that we could nail down some theoretical virtues that are truth conducive, and then use those to to compare different worldviews. But one problem I have with Graham Oppy's approach when he compares naturalism and theism is he just lists four virtues, basically imports them from the sciences, and then offers very little justification as to why they're truth conducive in the first place. I think that's not a very I don't know, he could have done better to explain why these virtues are truth conducive in the first place and why we should accept them. But I think if you do that work, if you you choose virtues, you choose you explain why they're truth conducive, and you make a case for why they're truth conducive, I see it being a fruitful approach.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that my line on this is going to be that there's not a good justification for taking these virtues as being truth conducive. I mean, again, I admit that I am a pretty hardcore empiricist on this. So even in the sciences, I don't think that inference the best explanation is truth conducive, at least in general. But when it comes to stuff, I mean, you mentioned, the likeliness. So the probability of a set of data on a given hypothesis. I imagine, and again, I don't know because, you haven't explained it in more detail. The line I'll probably take is that that's indeterminate. And when it comes to causal adequacy, so again, probably unsurprising given that I'm an empiricist, I tend to be an anti-realist about causality. I think that causal models are extremely useful in the sciences, but will lead us astray if applied without constraint, let's say. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this just comes down, I guess, to different background assumptions. But
I don't understand.
Yeah,
what
I
you can do
guess.
if you don't have causes.
Oh gosh, it sounded like
I
Darth Vader or
yeah.
something. Not even Darth Vader. Something.
I couldn't.
I was asking, is it better now?
No, it's like it's.
Hang on,
It's muffled.
turned the gate on. But
Okay, maybe is that better?
Yeah. That's
Okay,
much
I
better.
tried putting a gate on. Obviously, that didn't work. Sorry. What I don't understand what you can do if your worldview doesn't have causes. I mean, I guess it would be an agnosticism towards causes rather than a rejection.
I'm not sure I see. Okay, what's the problem here? Like,
Well, I mean, like you want to make a motor vehicle, you need to make assumptions about causes. You're just calling those assumptions rather than something that's actually descriptive of the real world.
so the goal of I mean, so if it comes to like let's take science, right? Again, the goal is systematizing, predicting, and controlling the observable phenomena, and like the important point is being able to act in such a way that you successfully achieve your goals and so on. I don't see why you would have to suppose that causality is like an objective feature of the world in order to achieve that. As long as you have, a causal model that makes the right predictions, that's good enough. So, I don't know. Like, let's say you have a model that says that, like, if you perform A, that will cause B to occur, right? Well, that's going to be just as successful in a world in which B is not caused by A, but is perhaps caused by some third factor that causes both, like, that also causes you to perform that action. And it's going to be just as successful in a world in which, like, there is just no causality at all, but there's just the same sequence of events, right? So a sort of Humean world. I mean, I think my position is I guess broadly a Humean one. I don't think it's that unusual. I think there's been, enough Humeans that I don't know. I don't feel like my position is all that strange, really.
Guess it's just not a view I've encountered or studied much, so I can't really push back on it too much for that same
Well,
reason.
I mean, so Bertrand Russell was a causal anti-realist for at least a time. Hume, obviously, and then a lot of the like contemporary empiricists. Bas van Frassen is a causal anti-realist and believes in God. He's also a theist, so it's not just atheists. But I don't think it's like. I mean, I guess it is kind of extreme, but not like completely crazy.
So
Not
I
like
mean,
I've heard of or something.
I put petrol in my car and it drives. If I put diesel in it, the engine will fail. Is the different combustion rate of the diesel not the cause of the engine failure?
So no, because I mean, like, I don't. I mean, obviously, there are very good pragmatic reasons, right, to use the language of causality, right? But the question is, if it's saying, like, is there like this, objective feature of the world, like this objective, kind of glue in the world, then, I mean, I don't believe in that. I would take the same line about modal properties in general. So, yeah.
Any comments, Adi Purusha?
Yeah, I guess like you could deny that there's like some like I don't know like causal glue or like some I don't know like law-like way I don't know some law-like properties of causation or like I don't know deny that like causation is like the thing that philosophers take it as, but it still seems like even if you're like a anti-realist about like causality, like there is still a sense in which like things don't just happen like randomly, like things are maybe necessitated or made probable by their like antecedent events. And if you don't have like, I like that analogy of the like gasoline and the petrol. Like you can deny that there's like a causal glue, but like if you put the wrong type of fuel in your car, like it won't work. So there's still a sense in which like effects don't happen without a suitable. I don't know. I don't know if maybe cause, but I don't know what you would say instead of cause. But I still, even if you deny like you take like a Humean stance, like you still have to answer to causes and effects, and you have to acknowledge that some effects might not be produced by natural causes per se.
Okay, but obviously I'm not denying that, there are certain patterns in the world. Okay, how about this, right? So, I mean, like, how do you rule out the idea that actually, this is a view that has been held by philosophers. In fact, this was held, like Berkeley, for example, held that there are no causes in the world, right? Everything is just brought about by God, right? So, I guess maybe you could say that God causes it, but in that case, it's not that the diesel is causing the car to break down or that the petrol is causing the car to run. It's that, like, God is bringing it about, that there is this, correlation between these events. So, ultimately, God is just causing everything, right, all of the time. That's not incoherent, right? But in that case, there wouldn't be a causal connection between the petrol in the car and the car failing to run.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say on that argument?
I'm not sure if I'm fully following that. I gave another analogy the other day when I was discussing with Nathan about, we were discussing something similar about epistemic virtues. About simplicity as being good in a hypothesis, and the example is, if you a good explanation for a motor vehicle is the laws of physics. You can describe combustion and the pistons and the way the whole thing works using very simple laws of physics. And, starting from first principles, you can explain the whole thing. Whereas a complicated explanation would be to say the car has an essence, and the car essence means that if you put petrol in, it goes. If you put diesel in, it fries. If you put the key in the ignition and turn it and, operate the pedals and the steering wheel in this way, it'll drive. If you operate it in a different way, it'll crash. And basically, every attribute you give to car essence is kind of like a brute thing. It's just another thing you've added to your hypothesis. Like it's just full of first principles, so to speak. Whereas a better explanation is broken down into simpler parts. So the explanation of, the laws of physics compared to just saying, God just made it that way has simplicity, and we can make a case that simplicity is a virtue, but by showing how, I guess it might be a reductio, like this whole car essence explanation is really absurd when we compare it to the laws of physics as an explanation for the motor vehicle.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not rejecting causal explanations. Like I said, I think causal models are really, really useful. It's just the same way as how I'm agnostic about whether or not the Big Bang happened, right? Obviously, being an anti-realist, but I don't reject the Big Bang model. I think it's an incredibly powerful model. I'm not proposing an alternative or anything like that. So, this isn't it's not like I'm saying that we should stop using causal language or anything along those lines.
Well, I think it's maybe the correct language would be a stain on the worldview if, everyday language and everyday intuition points one way, and then when we get to the actual ontological conclusions, we just throw the whole thing out.
I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that there is plenty of context in which we use, useful fictions, and it seems perfectly reasonable to me to extend that to causality.
I think one layer of the disagreement here might come back to a difference in epistemology, which can't really be resolved through argument. So I have this idea that, you can have brackets and you put your worldview inside of that brackets. So everything inside of here, like you could be watching a TV show and you could be like, is this just fiction or is it based on real life? And everything about the TV show is identical in both views. So similarly, you could have an epistemology where it's like there's external world realism or it's all a simulation. But in all the data is identical in both views. It's just you bracket all of that and you just say it's a simulation or there's a real external world. So similarly, we're all dealing with the same data. We're all saying science can make predictions, science can have all this technology and all these sorts of things. We're just disagreeing about whether there's an ontology behind that we can access. I mean, I guess it would be a kind of agnosticism. It's not like that you're denying that there could be an ontology which has these properties and causes and all this sort of stuff. You're just saying we can't know that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it doesn't. I don't know. To me, like, denial versus agnosticism is not a particularly, like, I mean, for me, the important point is just like I would account for these practices in pragmatic terms, rather than accounting for them by postulating entities or things beyond what manifest in experience, of which those practices provide true descriptions. And I mean, this is a line that I take in all sorts of contexts. That's what I would say about our practice of making moral judgments. It's what I say about scientific modeling. It's what I'm going to say about mathematics, about modality and causality and so on.
Right. Yeah. So when I was saying that it's kind of an axiomatic disagreement that can't be resolved by argument, I mean, like, so you got to take different dialectical steps depending on the person's premises and whether you can show an inconsistency or not. So your epistemology is like a kind of pragmatism. So if you're consistent and you accept the agnosticism on both the theist and the materialist side, then the only step is to say, I mean, not that I'm just talking about in a dialectical context. I'm not saying I'm trying to convert you or anything. It just would be that theism, if it offers practical benefits, like the pill example I gave earlier, if it can be shown through social science that people who practice theism are happier, healthier, and live longer, then it becomes rational to become a theist, regardless of whether we can know it's true or not.
I don't think you would even need that in order for it to be rational, though. I don't think there's anything irrational about holding beliefs that don't produce any particular, practical utility, as long as they don't, get in the way. So it's a matter of avoiding self-sabotage. If you go around making moral judgments and you assume that you are correctly describing moral facts, or if you construct scientific models and you assume that those models are describing reality even beyond what we observe, I mean, that's not going to cause any problems, right? There are plenty of really great scientists who are scientific realists. In fact, most of them are, I think. So yeah, I mean, you don't need to show the practical utility. As long as it's coherent with your other beliefs and it doesn't have any significant practical disutility, it's fine.
I'd love to see you have a discussion with Sean Carroll, because he's a scientific realist. He really hangs on to that. I think that would be quite interesting. So no, but I mean, saying it's rational, people who hold opposing worldviews are rational. But if I wanted to say you should become a theist, then using I'd have to come up with premises which you accept. So if it's true that you become healthier, happier, and live longer by becoming a theist, and if those things are what you desire, then you should become a theist. That's the basic logic.
Yeah, well, I would take that. I mean, again, this to me seems like a kind of very minor experience machine, right? Like if I was able to just change my beliefs at will, and it's the case that by becoming a theist I achieve all of these wonderful things, then I mean, yeah, for me there's no question. I absolutely would take that. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you get a lot of atheists. You're actually I like to distinguish between internet atheism and philosophical atheism. So philosophical atheism is what Graham Oppy does. Internet atheism is what Matt Dillahunty does. You're definitely on the philosophical side, where it's you don't really have an axe to grind with theism. You just happen to not believe it. which is very respectable. Fortunately, it seems like internet atheism is sort of either becoming more advanced or dying out and being replaced by philosophical atheism, or maybe I'm just listening to better content and a couple people who are atheists who I follow on YouTube are becoming more intelligent. Can't remember what the other point I was going to make. You have anything to add, Adi?
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe like I think you were mentioning how you're like someone is going to try like an experiment. Like I think with at least like certain mystical practices, you can do like experiments. You can just like see how your life was before like chanting meditation, then start chanting meditation, see the results, and just see how your life improves and see if you want to stick with it. That's sort of one. I don't know. I think that's like one thing we can offer to like someone who's agnostic. Like we have a practice. Just try it, see how you like it. If you find your life is better, then why not just keep with it?
Yeah, that reminded me of the points I was going to say. So there's moving forward with the same line of reasoning. There's two angles to go with it. One is to debate the social science, and that involves actually going into the social science literature or doing social science and figuring out, is it true that theism brings good results, better results than not having theism? And the other side of it is it possible to become a theist? Is it possible to change your beliefs? So I think the second debate is very easy to show that it's possible because, I mean, there's so much social science to show how your beliefs are shaped by the people you surround yourself by and the content you consume. So if you want to believe something, you just listen to content that tells you it's true and gives arguments for it repeatedly, and you surround yourself by people who share those beliefs which you're trying to acquire, and engage yourselves in activities which will give you experiences which confirm that belief, and you'll get there. The social science debate is not so easy because there's not a lot of good social science on this, and some of it points in different directions.
I don't know if beliefs are as easily controllable as that. I mean, I think you can probably, you can influence them, but part of it, I think, probably depends on the sort of personality that somebody has. I mean, I tend to be kind of contrarian. I'm not sure that surrounding myself with, look, right, I am in some sense surrounded by like people who, well, I'm definitely surrounded by people who care a lot about like animal welfare. And ever since doing my YouTube channel, I've had a lot of vegans and so on that I've spoken to. And I mean, that hasn't budged me at all on the animal rights question. I don't know. I think it might be a bit optimistic to suppose that, just engaging with theist literature and surrounding yourself with theists and so on would make someone a theist. Might just make them like more effective at like combating theist arguments, right? As they learn more and more of them, and they continue to be like critical, and they continue to find holes in them, that's sometimes what happens. So
I think the spiritual experience is the real powerful thing. Like, for example, with the NDEs, I mean, whether or not, I think there are compelling cases. Of course, that's another debate, but there's no debate whether there's people that have these experiences and come back with their worldview completely changed. And then there's doctors who have patients that this happens to, who have their beliefs completely changed because they just can't explain it on their current materialistic worldview, so they adopt a different worldview. Especially the people who experience it. If you wake up outside of your body and see your body on the operating table, it's pretty hard to maintain, an idea that consciousness is caused by the brain and completely dependent on the brain.
Well, I think you're going to have a hard time convincing people to very nearly kill themselves in order to change their beliefs.
No, but they might want to go and do ayahuasca or that. And Krishna consciousness. So we're Hare Krishnas, and there's quite a I use the word scientific, defining science here as reliable means of acquiring knowledge and producing results. So, by having a structured way of developing your consciousness so that you perceive the truth of Krishna consciousness. Of course, I'm using loaded terms which assume the truth, but I'm just explaining the idea. By applying the process of Krishna consciousness, you live a pure life. you eat a vegetarian diet, you chant Hare Krishna, you engage in kirtan, you study the philosophy. This elevates your consciousness and produces an experience. So like, it's quite common that people immediately after they start chanting Hare Krishna, they'll lose interest in eating meat. And often when people leave Krishna consciousness, that'll be permanent. It's very rare that someone will go back to eating meat after being a Hare Krishna for some time. We've been going an hour and 45 minutes. We'll probably wrap it up at 2 hours. So I don't know if what we want to discuss before we wrap it up. We can see if there's any questions.
Is this live? And
Yeah,
if so,
yeah.
are there questions?
Yeah, well, there's only like 11 people watching, but if they've got questions,
okay.
they can fire them through. Any other points you guys wanted to discuss?
Yeah, I think the point about like experience and like trying something and seeing where it leads is like a good. I mean, maybe it's like not the most, it's debatable philosophically, but I think for like the average person, they can just like try a mystical practice, see how it affects them, see how they like it, see if they want to continue or not, and like that's like one sort of thing that the Hare Krishna tradition offers. At some point, these philosophical debates also get tricky, and it often things come down to intuitions, and I think experiences are often a better form of like proof than just like philosophy at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that analytic philosophy misses is the importance of experience. That I like comparing it to if engineers never left their drawing room and actually tested materials, then we wouldn't have a science of engineering. We would just have a bunch of speculation. So similarly with philosophy, there should be actual application to see. So I mean, the traditional thing in like Eastern philosophy is that there would be worldviews and they had practices and there was results that were consciousness based that you got from applying a practice. So it was very practical, and I guess you could say scientific because you're actually out there. It's empirical in a way because you're actually out there and looking for experiences. You're applying a philosophy and seeing what fruits it brings.
That approach is missing in philosophy nowadays. Well, I mean, maybe I don't want to make so much of a generalization. Maybe there are people that argue for like less armchairness of philosophy, but at least in the Eastern traditions, yeah, I like how it's like a more holistic approach. Like you're also doing like practices that give you experiences that can confirm your philosophical views.
Any comments, Kane?
I don't care about experience at all. So actually, maybe I shouldn't say that as an empiricist. But no, like I don't know. I just it's weird. Like I've often felt like I just don't really, if you ask me to sort of describe what my own experiences are, I'm not really sure I could say anything. Like I can tell you, about the things that are around me right now. Okay, like I'm seeing a computer and like this is a pen, it's black, right? And I'm smelling certain things. Is that, I don't know, am I describing experience or am I just describing like publicly observable things in the world? If you want to talk about what's going on inside my mind, I don't really reflect on it that much. I certainly don't know what's going on inside other people's minds. So yeah.
Oh, that reminded me.
I guess if sorry.
That reminded me of another point from earlier. I asked about the existence of other minds, and you said, "Well, I don't really know what other people are thinking or experiencing." But of course, we don't know precisely what they're thinking or feeling, but we know that they're thinking something and feeling something. And this is why we feel moral obligations, because my actions...
I disagree with that.
Okay.
It's maybe another debate.
Yeah. Well, what would you say back to that?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm a moral anti-realist, but like when it comes to justifying morality within that framework, I mean, I would just take a sort of contractarian line. I think that morality is ultimately something that is that I see morality as being rules constructed by rational agents for the benefit of rational agents, and it doesn't matter what's going on inside your head, right? All that matters is that you're able to say things to me, right, and engage in arguments and debate with me. It really makes no difference to me, like whether or not you're a philosophical zombie. I mean, I can see why this would be a problem for some people. Like if I was a utilitarian or something, then this would be a really serious issue because, I then have to make some judgment about like under what circumstances are other people feeling pleasure. But that has absolutely no role in my way of thinking about morality. So, yeah.
I guess that's a whole nother discussion, morality.
Yeah, another can of worms for another day.
we got another 10 minutes. So moral contract theory, but why would I feel any obligation to engage in a moral contract or a social contract? Why shouldn't I just do whatever's going to get me the most benefit? So
because it will get you the most benefit. So I would ground it in the like long run rational self-interest of each individual.
So this would be you'd be requiring to assume that it is the case that doing what's moral for society, in a given situation is going to be good for me in the long run. But suppose like I'm some king and I can totally get away with it. I can just do whatever I want, and I don't have to worry about being brought down because I just have to not do it too much that people are going to overthrow me, and then I can just enjoy all the riches of the kingdom, and there's no harm to come to me as a result. So a situation like that is at least hypothetically possible, right? It seems the assumption that doing what's morally right and doing what's good for your own personal self-interest converge is not that tenable.
Well, I would make the argument to the king that it is in his self-interest. That's the way I would make the argument. It may not be in his self-interest to, I don't know, refrain from, killing random people. But like I'm a moral anti-realist. I don't think there are any moral facts. So yeah, like in that case, I'd have nothing to say to him. But so be it. So I mean, just to be clear, like the way that I see this is right. I think that there are things we could say to that king. Like even if you are relatively powerful, there are still very good reasons, I think, to behave in ways that respect other people's ability to decide what to do with their own bodies and lives and so on. But yeah, I mean, in principle, there may well be circumstances where it just is in people's self-interest to, I don't know, kill and pillage and so on.
Right, and that's not a problem for your moral views.
No,
I guess you just attribute it to the bleak nature of reality.
No, I would just I don't think there are moral facts, right? So morality for me is a useful fiction, and the way that I approach it when I engage in moral arguments is by appealing to people's self-interest. Sometimes maybe there's just nothing I can say to them. Right. I just have to hope that situation doesn't occur too often.
So for me, our moral intuitions are, like the idea that it's wrong to torture babies. These kind of, obviously there's gray areas where it's not really clear what's right or wrong, but there's extreme cases where something is very clearly wrong or very clearly right. And I would say our intuitions about these things are so deep that if we can be wrong about that, then I don't see how it doesn't entail a kind of global skepticism, or at least a severe kind of skepticism. If we can be wrong about that, then what else could we be wrong about?
Okay, but my intuition is that it is wrong to torture babies. My very strong intuition is that that's not true, right? And that's the case for every moral claim. So if you say, it is good to give to charity, or it is bad to give to charity, I have a really strong intuition that those claims are not true, that there are no moral facts. I mean, I personally agree that, it's really bad to kill babies and it's really good to give to charity. But I see that as just being I don't know, my feelings or something. It doesn't feel to me like I'm, describing facts in reality. So I would say that given the fact that you have those intuitions, it makes sense for you to be a moral realist. And again, I don't think there's anything irrational about that. But that kind of reasoning just isn't going to move me because I don't have those. I have the exact opposite intuitions. My very strong intuitions are that there are no moral facts.
Well, if we've just got different moral intuitions, then there's not really much I can say, because morality really comes down to axiomatic intuitions or assumptions.
That's why I try to appeal to self-interest rather than just appealing to, intuitions. But
well, a lot of people will be highly motivated in their life to do great sacrifice or work extremely hard for abstract goals for the greater good, benefiting other people, doing something meaningful. So depending on the person, so for someone who's very self-interested and what, based on the Hare Krishna worldview, you'd call a lower state of consciousness, then you have to appeal to self-interest. But for people who are higher up in their state of consciousness, you can appeal to meaning and principles and virtues and morality and so on.
I mean, maybe that works. I don't know. I haven't. I'm just going by what's worked the best in my own experience. But obviously, since I'm just an outright anti-realist about it, and since I view it as a useful fiction, I'm quite happy to, appeal to whatever will work. It's just my experience is that trying to frame it in terms of self-interest tends to be more effective.
Right. We're at the 2-hour mark, so we can wrap it up here. Any final comments?
Not really.
Kane?
Covered a lot of ground. Sort of interesting format, but had some interesting discussions, I think.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. It was quite interesting. Reminded me of my discussion with Graham Oppie, where it's he's just yeah, that's reasonable to a lot of things I said. Which it's not as exciting as when you have deep disagreements, but at the same time it's higher class. It's more academic.
I think at a certain point it's just you reach a philosophical impasse and there's not really much you can do to bring the other person on your party, and there's not much the other person can do to bring you on his party.
But it's really interesting to figure out where the disagreements actually lie. How deep can you chase it until it's okay, well, this is just a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah.
That kind of thing's useful.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this kind of stuff, be sure to subscribe. Let us know what you think down in the comments. Kane's got a YouTube channel where he does lots of interesting content. There's a link to that in the description, so go and check that out. And I'll see you next time. Play the outro.